From the Toronto Star, I'm Althea Raj, and this matters.
What we've seen tonight is that millions of Canadians have chosen a progressive plan.
Justin Trudeau claimed a renewed mandate Monday and a focus on programs and policies he's already worked on to deliver and others he's pledging to start tackling.
Together for real climate action, for $10 a day childcare, for homes that are in reach for middle-class families, for our shared journey on the path of reconciliation.
Today on the show, we look forward to what we can expect from Trudeau's third mandate. Ottawa Bureau Chief and economics columnist Heather Scoffield is here, along with national columnist Susan Delacourt. Welcome.
Hello. Oh, thanks.
Susan, let me start with you. What do you think we should expect from this new government?
Oh, big question. And I think that there's going to be a couple of stages of this. I think there's going to be immediate minority government because we are in a pandemic still. And then there's going to be the longer term. So I think this is just my guess, is that you're going to see them go a little more quickly than usual. I always say that, and then they turn out to be 3 hours late, metaphorically, for everything. But I think you're going to see them do things on the COVID front right away. You know, the vaccine mandates, proof of vaccination money to the provinces, probably a first minister's meeting. The idea that it was late in the campaign of making it a criminal offense to block hospitals, all of that stuff. I think you'll see them be very active on COVID immediately. And then some of the other promises, I had to go and look because none of them leaked out at me from the campaign. I think then you'll see that in maybe a budget, not necessarily a throne speech. I'm expecting they'll be very much focused right now on pandemic and then progressive.
Is that your read as well, Heather?
Yes, although, so I do think they're going to have to take some steps right away on the pandemic for sure. And it sure helps if we can get vaccines into children too, right? That changes the dynamic of how that we see contagion across the country, and also changes the dynamic on how fast they can move towards the reopening. But I think there's some big decisions that they have to make right away that will actually set the tone for the longer term. So we'll have to have a fiscal update of some kind in the fall, which stems from a throne speech, but is also just, standard accounting, right? That they're going to have to reconcile a lot of the promises that they've made and with the fiscal framework. So that will propel a bunch of decisions kind of for the long term on the recovery. And then we've got a huge global climate summit coming up in November. They've put we have a lot of policy pieces in place already to take them to that climate summit, but not everything. So during the election campaign, the Liberals promised, they were running on their record. They were talking a lot about, some of the big climate moves that they made to increase their ambition. They made those promises last December and then again in the spring. But they also promised to go ahead in a pretty aggressive way on electric vehicles and on electrification. And that's something that they want to, I think, take to Glasgow with them. So there's going to have to be some action on that front too, which are near-term actions to determine more long-term future.
Well, I guess if their whole argument was the climate crisis can't wait, they clearly can't wait to get started, right?
That's true.
There were a lot of progressive policies in this platform. I mean, I guess you could argue there's been progressive policies since 2015, but it strikes me that there's a lot of areas of agreement with the opposition parties, obviously the NDP, but also in some ways the Bloc. And we heard the Bloc say that they were going to be reaching out across the aisle to work with their political opponents. And even some ways the Conservatives, like I think about housing, there was a lot of similar ideas. They may not agree on the exact policy solutions, but they seem to have identified the same problems. Do you think that we will kind of get a kumbaya parliament where the opposition is willing to work with the government in some of these issues that they've identified?
Sure, I can take that if you like. I think on housing, there is a lot of commonality in how they define the problem. And affordability clearly has been on everybody's minds during the campaign because housing prices rose so much during COVID. And, all parties identified that as a problem for young people in particular and for newcomers to Canada. And there's common ground there to act right away. I think the differences that we saw during the campaign in proposals for how to deal with that were just a matter of branding. I mean, everybody had to have a different package or just to show themselves to be different, right? But I think there's a lot of common ground to act there. The thing is, we've been through this before, where the government will push on housing prices and put in a bunch of policy measures. It takes a while to get the housing industry on side. I mean, there are a lot of people that own houses that like to see the prices go up too. And a lot of real estate agents who like to sell houses and flip houses and make a lot of money on that. And financial institutions, there are a lot of powerful people at play behind the scenes here. It's not just a matter of getting agreement across the aisle. And it's also a matter of, how do you actually make these promises work? We've had proposals in the past, like since 2016, we've had a series of measures that the government has been imposing, and nothing has slowed down those housing markets. So, for regular people who are looking for immediate action on being able to jump in there and buy their house, in an affordable way, I think that might be a bit of wishful thinking at this point.
I think you raise a good point, Althea, though, about the kumbaya and the tone, right? That because I'm going to be watching immediately to see what the tone is with the NDP, because, that's going to be the dance partner, the main dance partner for the Liberals in all of this. And first of all, is Jagmeet Singh and the NDP in a position to come to the Liberals with a demand, like something concrete, something beyond make the ultra rich pay? For example, are they going to come with a pharmacare, something that they want from a tangible sign? It occurred to me as we were talking about the climate summit, we've seen this before. A gesture that Trudeau could do is offer to take the NDP or even Elizabeth May with them to Glasgow. Like
he did in 2015.
Exactly. Yeah. That would be a sign that, we're going to have a little more of a kumbaya parliament. I'm not confident of that given the tone of the election campaign, but I will be really curious to see what the tone and the substance of the negotiation, if any, with the NDP is. They could be triumphal, which I think would be a mistake. They could say, look, you thought you were going to come out of this with 40 seats. You came out with 25. You're still the fourth party. We don't have to pay attention to you. I think that would be a mistake. But that's, I think, something to watch in the immediate days to see whether something has truly changed.
You mean if the Liberals set a different tone in the House of Commons?
Right. Not even in the House of Commons, behind the scenes with the opposition.
If they show a desire to work as partners.
Right.
I want to pick up on a few things that you mentioned, because I think when you look at the policy agendas, like when we think about what type of government we're going to get, obviously we can only judge them by what they've put forward in the shop window. But on pharmacare, the Liberals haven't completely scrapped the idea of pharmacare. They just haven't budgeted for it working. But they also haven't budgeted for a number of other things that they said they were interested in, like increasing healthcare transfers to the provinces, for example.
That's a big one.
Are there things that you see in the Liberals' platform and in reading between the lines, I guess, that make you think that at the end of this parliament, we will have a country that looks differently?
I have two answers to that. There's sort of a Weasley way of answering. We should. Do we have a more progressive? I was really struck during the campaign by how much all of the parties were trying to be progressive. And that sort of follows, if you looked on the debate stage of the three debates, never have we had more of a progressive array of policies, really. The only guy who was doing the arguing for small government and less government was outside the debate hall screaming with his purple protesters. Know that we don't have anybody who's not advocating big government right now or government intervention in your lives. So I think maybe that is where we're going. The problem with, what's standing in the way of that is, and I know a lot of people don't agree with this, but is Justin Trudeau's absolute adherence to the Constitution and his caution to the point of paranoia about getting involved in provincial matters. He won't do a vaccine passport of his own. He'll let provinces do it. There's going to be a fight, I think, with the premiers about conditions on healthcare. And we haven't even talked about long-term care. I think they've got to do something on that as well. I put that in the COVID basket. But if we do have a more progressive government, if that's the question, or a changed country because of this, right now, I don't see any big ideas that will change that. But it will be the Conservatives moving to the center that do that rather than, or the provinces doing that, or the United States doing that, more than it will be initiated by this government.
Heather, what are your thoughts?
I'm not sure at this point that we know what the Conservatives are going to look like in the House of Commons. During the election campaign, Erin O'Toole did try to move that party and was not able to deliver the seats in the House of Commons. So does he continue to push along those lines? He's indicating right now that he does, he sticks to his resolve and that it's a 2-election strategy and that, he will continue down those lines. But I'm not sure that that his caucus will let him do that. And I think that's something to watch for sure. It could be that kind of progressive or centrist tilt that we saw from them during the campaign won't persist. But I think the Liberals are pretty determined to go down the progressive route. They feel that they have that strength, regardless of what the Conservatives will be doing, that they can take that from the NDP and, to some extent from the Bloc Québécois. And try to, I think by definition, because of where we're at in the pandemic, we will look a lot different than the next time we go into a campaign. I mean, the pandemic is not over, but tapering, and it has changed us for good, I think. And what the next Parliament does with that, it's not neutral, right? It's got to be. There's a whole array of choices here that we have to make on the future of work. On, we've decided during the campaign that, frontline workers, essential workers need to be paid more, that this was not right. We've decided that long-term care has to be fixed, and that's not necessarily a federal lead on that, but they do seem pretty determined. All the parties seem determined that was a travesty. It has to be fixed. On top of that, that the federal government has a very central role to play in income support, especially during times of trouble. So I think, a year and a half from now, or 2 years or 3 years from now, or whenever we have the next campaign, in between that time, we will have had to reconcile or at least grapple with all of those pretty huge issues. And so we'll be different on the other side for sure.
In a way, governments are kind of like citizens, don't you think? I'm sure everybody's played this as a party game or a table conversation during this pandemic. Do you want your life back the way it was before the pandemic, or do you want a different one? If you could have your wish, would you have your life as it was in 2019, or has the pandemic created a new life for you? And I think government writ large is actually looking at that question too. The election results would almost indicate that the wish of Canadians was to have the world they had before 2019. But that's a really, I think, mistaken look at the election results. A bunch of things happened beneath the surface. I wouldn't take the exact same numbers that somebody called it this morning, the doppelganger parliament, to mean that everybody wants the kind of government they had when they last elected one. I think things have changed, but they're micro level changes, not macro.
I totally agree with that. I think at first I thought the campaign was going to be a dichotomy between those two visions, a Build Back Better versus let's just get back to normal competition. But it wasn't that simple at all. There was a lot of pressure on the Liberals just to tell people, okay, like the pandemic has to be dealt with right away. Let's get back to some sort of normal and then deal with bigger changes later on. But I think also the Conservatives were pushed down that line of, okay, yeah, some changes have to be made here. And then they did propose some pretty fundamental changes in how the future looks.
We'll be right back. Okay, I want to pick up on something that Susan mentioned. You said there's kind of a lack of big ideas from the platform. And I feel like there's actually a lot of big stuff in there. I feel like if the government does what it is suggesting it wants to do, long-term care could look drastically different. Healthcare in this country could look different. Even the fact that the government announced, or the Liberal Party announced in its platform, that they were going to crack down on two-tiered healthcare that was basically available nearly almost everywhere across this country. The changes that they want to do with regards to the climate crisis, electrifying the grid. Heather talked about electric vehicles, the $10 a day childcare agreements, deeper targets, changes for gig workers to offer them CPP and employment insurance. I mean, even if they stole ideas from the Conservatives, like increasing the workers' benefit, for example, we could have a country where the social safety net is much stronger than it has been in the past. Am I out of left field?
No,
I don't think so.
No, I think we're talking about the same thing, though. These are all micro changes, right? Or they're not. They're expensive and they're large. childcare is hard, and long and expensive. But I think I go back, I don't know who the anonymous source was who told Radcan during the election that the Liberals were still in search of the big idea, some shiny thing. I don't know that that's necessary or even possible. Like, are they going to launch a new national program? I think you're right, that we are going to see a new social safety net in Canada. That's a good way of putting it, actually, in many, many different ways. And some of that has been forced not by the political agenda, but by the pandemic. Would they have ever changed the EI system for self-employed workers if the pandemic hadn't come along?
They certainly talked about it for long enough. and right? It was no surprise to me in March of 2020 that the EI system was not able to handle a crisis like that. They've been talking about it for so long that they let their computer system antiquate because they thought they were going to change it and they just never did. So it was a big kick in the rear end for them to get it done. And it's still not finished. I mean, they're still in the midst of trying to fix that permanently.
We spoke to a few stakeholders about what they hope the Liberal government will achieve. Here they are.
My name is Natalie Mera. I'm the Executive Director of the Ontario Health Coalition. The Liberal government during the election actually promised to uphold the Canada Health Act better than it has before, but the record has not been good on that so far with the Liberal government. They have reluctantly, with huge public pressure, acted in Quebec to put pressure on the government to stop extra user fees in private clinics for Quebecers, but only after thousands of doctors and nurses and tens of thousands of seniors took action and threatened to go to court to make them do it. In Saskatchewan, they sent a letter to the provincial government, but really didn't do anything to follow up on the government bringing in for-profit clinics that charge $1,000 per MRI for enhanced access for those who can afford to pay, while others still have to wait and wait longer. So that is a real problem.
I'm Dan Kelly, president of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. The Liberals had some really good ideas in their platform, and small business owners would be excited to see some of these things come to fruition. The Liberals have talked about extending their hiring incentive until March 31st, 2022. That's a big deal. On top of that, Liberals have expanded the wage and the rent subsidy. They've talked about doing that only, though, for the tourism sector until the end of the winter. That's super helpful for tourism-related businesses, but so many other small firms really are depending on the continuation of the rent and the wage subsidy in order to keep their lights on as we get through the rest of the pandemic. And I'd say the biggest concern that we have is there's still been a year and a half later, no progress in the Prime Minister's promise to new business owners to extend COVID support programs to them. They've qualified for none of the COVID support programs. Many of them are hanging on by a thread. This was a promise that the Prime Minister made in May of 2020 that has yet to be delivered, and the platform spoke to nothing on that front.
Adi Rastchen, graduate of L'École Polytechnique and coordinator of Police Citoyen, who advocates for tougher gun control.
Well, I think at the very least, the Liberal government now has no choice but to deliver on banning assault weapons and large capacity magazines. This has been a long saga, something they had promised back in 2015, promised again in 2019, two broken promises, and then they ran again on doing it properly. In terms of handguns, it's really bad news. The Liberals have continued to insist on offloading this responsibility to other jurisdictions. Initially, they had said they would offload it to municipalities who've been very vocal in rejecting this idea. And now the idea is to offload it to provinces, despite the fact that many provinces have clearly said that they're not interested.
I'm Morna Ballantyne, Executive Director of Childcare Now, Canada's National Childcare Advocacy Association. We've been pushing for a national system of early learning and childcare for 50 years, and this means that the work can continue. The Liberal government can get a lot done through the signing of these agreements, which provide for 5-year commitments to expand the system very rapidly and to bring down fees very rapidly. And as we see more and more childcare being made available at an affordable price, the public appetite for more is going to increase. Everybody is going to want in. And I think within a few years, what we're going to see is the building of a childcare system that no future government can take away.
Okay, to loop all of this back, I want to kind of cast forward a little bit. There's been some chatter about Justin Trudeau's future as Liberal leader. If this is his last mandate, as many suspect that it is, what are the legacy items that you think he will want to ensure are done before he takes his long walk in the snow?
I think on climate, I think he'll want to have made a difference there. And on some sort of, the childcare thing is in keeping with the national child benefit. I think the idea that children fared better. And I think he will, and it pisses people off. The feminist agenda is something he will want to be his legacy. He's clearly not deterred by the criticism for it. I think that's going to be a big one for him too. I'm really curious to see this. This is me not answering the question directly, because I've been really struck since 2015 how much they have been in crisis management and reactive. And we don't really have an idea.
From external pressures like Donald Trump and COVID. And
exactly, yes. And even in, their tiny internal pressures, right? But we have not seen, I think we've got maybe a little flicker at it in the first year of Trudeau's government before Trump came along. And then everything has been reactive. I would put the election of Doug Ford's government into that too. They shuffled a cabinet for it. So this is their chance, I think, if I were sitting on their shoulders right now and say, show me what you can do when you're not reacting to things. And maybe that story is yet to be written, but I think it has to do with climate, children, income inequality is a bolder one. Heather probably knows that better than I do, but those would be my guesses at what his legacy items are.
I'm surprised you didn't say Indigenous reconciliation.
Oh, pardon me. Yes, definitely. Yeah, that's in there too. That he himself has talked about that as an ongoing conversation. I think his legacy will be for kicking it off, but not for solving it.
Heather, what are your thoughts?
I keep thinking about in 2016, when Trump was about to take over in the United States, Joe Biden came here and they had a big state dinner for him. And it was, a very somber moment for progressives. And Biden made a point of saying to Trudeau that, you're the standard bearer now for progressive government in the West, and let's see what you can do with it. And I think there's been a lot about water under the bridge since then, obviously. But I think Trudeau would really like to be able to show at the end of all of this that he actually did that. And, so childcare is a huge part of that for sure. Being able to bring $10 a day, childcare, and because that childcare embodies so many different things, right, that they want to do. It's not just helping children. It's also getting women back in the workforce. It's also propelling inclusive growth, all of those things that they like to talk about and are very hard to deliver. So that's certainly a big one for him. And then also, especially on the climate front, to be able to reconcile growth and competitiveness and economic strength with also cutting emissions. I mean, if they can somehow crack that nut, I think he would be very much very happy to put that into that bucket of showing, okay, this is how progressives do it.
Fascinating conversation, ladies. Thank you so much.
Nice to talk to you both.
Likewise.
Heather Scoffield is the Ottawa bureau chief and the economics columnist at the Toronto Star. Susan Delacourt is a national political columnist, also at the Star. A big thank you to you for listening, and also to the This Matters team for welcoming me with open arms and allowing me to sit in this chair over the last few days. A huge thanks to JP Fozo and Sean Pattenden, who have been stitching this show together and really guiding me through the whole process. This Matters will return to probably non-federal political coverage tomorrow. Thank you so much for listening. Speak to you soon.